So, still people coming in? Find your place, all good? Maybe someone can close the door afterwards. Closing the door is the call to action for everybody to run, right? Okay. So, yeah, hello, I'm Jan. I'm a design operations manager at a company in Germany working for the German-speaking market. The company is called Sing, and we are our product is a social media platform, a professional social media platform for the international speaking people who don't know the German market. It's like the LinkedIn for the German speaking market. And I'm a big fan of giving feedback, receiving feedback. So any feedback you have after my talk, I'm very welcome that you share it with me in a one-on-one setting, private space, or even as a question or a lesson learned. So I hope I can give you in my talk a lot of takeaways. That is how it's designed. I'm sharing a lot of lessons learned. I'm trying to level up your design process tomorrow. Hopefully for everyone, there is a little piece you can take tomorrow and take into action. So when we start, I want to get into this giving feedback mood a little bit. Do you know from back 2019 this story running on Twitter, Design Twitter, amazing place to discuss design, right? They were discussing like, oh, this is awesome, or this is bullshit. The new design of the Slack logo. Some people see like little dogs there in the logo. That was the running gag. And I mean, on Twitter, discussing design is kind of meh, not so well done. There's another story. Just last year, during the pandemic, there was this new redesign of the Google icons on the Google Docs and Google spreadsheet. That got controversy, and I have to admit I was also tweeting about that a little bit. So. Yeah, even though I know better, and I want to share with you some tips and tricks how to level up. And I can tell you from the beginning, it's not on Twitter. You don't do this on Twitter. So, but many of you maybe have heard one of these feedbacks in one of your discussions, in one of your meetings at work, maybe your director or your fellow designer or your product manager or someone, or even just a client, make the logo bigger kind of thing, or can you make it pop? One of my favorites is, it looks, should be more like Apple. What does that mean? I don't know. So when you receive this kind of feedback, this is important that you know there is reaction and there is feedback. And there is an amazing book from the author Adam Connor. He's co-author of an O'Reilly book called Discussing Design. And he says, critique is a skill and you only get better with practice. So when you take one thing out of this talk, practice is the key. And we will get to that throughout the talk when I share all our lessons learned and our tips and tricks. So before I go into sharing with all these takeaways, let's quickly run down what is design critique at all. It's just another buzzword, or what is it? So discussing design, as Adam says, is a skill. It is something we have to train, we have to do. It's like wireframing or operating Figma or whatever you think is a skill. Discussing design, giving good feedback, analyzing design is also a skill. So let's dig into some basics. There are 3 types of feedback. The first kind of feedback is this, oh, this is ugly, I've done it other way. Oh, by the way, the other way around as well. Oh, this is beautiful. Like when you're just clapping on the shoulder of your peer, done perfectly, wonderful, amazing. This is, we call it reactive feedback. It's a pure reaction. There is no thought into analyzing what is going on here. It's just a pure reaction. And then there is another type of feedback, and that is the wonderful thing we tend to do a lot of times, and that is in the area, I would have done it a little differently. Can you put that button from left to right? I would have chosen a slider, all that things. We call that directive feedback. It's basically an order. Do this differently, make it pop, make it more like Apple. No, this is a real direction. This is maybe you sometimes hear that from your superior or a senior designer or a principal designer or whatever people you have on your teams, or the PO is fed up with what's going on here and just says, do it this way. This is directive feedback. And then there is this third kind of feedback, and that is in the area of, okay, when this is our objective, then these parts of your design have a strength, have a weakness, they contribute to that objective in this and that way, and we call that critique. So now I hope you have a kind of an understanding what design critique, what critique is. Then there is two opposing kind of formats, or two different kind of formats you might have heard of. So there's the design critique. Told you it's about analyzing design, looking at the objective, what is good, what is bad, all that stuff. And the intention of a design critique as a meeting, as a format, is to improve the design, to discuss the design, to level up the targeting towards the objective and stuff like that. And it's continuously done. And then there is the design review. The design review, show of hands, who has a design review format, like once a week, once a month? Yeah, we all do that, right? So the design review, we call it like that, is typically at the end of the design process. The intention of a design review format is to make a decision. Do we go route A or route B? Or do we iterate further, or do we stick with that, what we have right now? And typically, as I said, it's not a feedback format, it's a decision format done at the end of the design process. So there's a difference, continuous versus decision-making or feedback, giving feedback on your design in the design critique. So then a little theory, or not theory, this is just a little human factors kind of thing going on. I'm not an expert in that field, but I think it's very, very interesting, very important to think a little bit about that. So when you see a design, there are two things going on pretty quickly in our designer heads. So there's, on the one hand, the analyzing of the design, and this is for experienced designers happening in milliseconds. You look at something, you know what's wrong, analyzed it like in your head quickly. And then there is the problem solving. You immediately see something, the button needs to go to the right, the color is wrong, the typo is not big enough, the logo is too small, and stuff like that. This is the problem solving. And typically, we think analyzing and we talk problem solving. That's the typical thing that is happening in a session. You immediately when you get feedback, you get basically new solvable ideas how to solve the problem, but you have no clue, why do I even need to change? And this is the important thing, that critique is shifting our conversation to the right, and design reviews are mostly happening on the left, or when you have this famous hippo opinion in a meeting that is just telling you what to do. This is like he's trying to help you problem solving, but you're not understanding why even to improve. So to exit out from the problem solving, that you're not talking about problem solving, but you're helping your fellow designers, your fellow peers in analyzing the design so he or she can improve. It should work something like this. This should be your train of thought. So we start with, what is the objective? What do we even try to solve here? What's the problem? Did I understand it correctly? From there you go on, what elements of this design contribute to that objective and which ones don't. And from there you go, do those elements effectively address the objective? Does the design I see here and the elements I have analyzed contribute to achieve the objective or not? And when you see something that is happening there, yes or no, you talk about why and why not. So this brings you over to the analyzing train of thought, and you talk about analyzing the design of improvements or of strengths and of weaknesses. So this is theory. Sounds good. Everybody's nodding. Anyone disagree? Nope. All right, so then how does design critique as a format work? And I will tell you here the story how we do it at Zing. There is no one way to do it. There are many ways you can do design critique. There is no right or wrong. It's just, I tell you the story and the lessons learned we do, how we do it. So our critique setup looks like the following. We have a group of people, typically 5 people, and they come together to discuss one design. So we have a facilitator. One of the persons in the group is picking up the role of a facilitator. I will tell you more about what a facilitator needs to focus on later. We have the designer, that's the person bringing his topic, his material to design, his artifacts. And then we have 3 critics. And these 3 critics are giving feedback. And we do that in a 30-minute setup every week in a weekly rotation, and we're just discussing one topic. You could argue now, okay, 30 minutes, or do we do it bigger? 1 or 2 hours, more designers, more things to discuss. You can have that conversation. Our lesson learned is smaller is better. You can discuss like, do we do it on a weekly rotation or do we do it on demand? So when some designer has something, we come together and do a design critique, or do we do it like on schedule every week? We settled with weekly scheduled meetings, and I will tell you later on why we settled there. So one question here in the room, show of hands, who has a format something like that, where we discuss design? Oh, that's great. Great, amazing. And maybe I can give you some lessons learned that the people who already have something like that in your organization to improve your design critiques, and all the others who think like, yay, that's a good idea, maybe we should start doing something like that. So I give you like a head start, boost you up to improve already and don't do mistakes. I mean, there is no real mistake. Discussing design is always fruitful. And as long as you do it respectfully, there is no like worst case scenario happening. Still, my first tip. And this one is, I would say, it sounds simple, but there is a lot of thought we put into there, and that is very deliberately done, because as design leaders, we tend to make it bigger, scale it. And but this is an important one. You need a safe space to share. And why do you need it? Because we want to discuss work in progress. And I don't know about you, but when I show my designs, it's always like I'm making myself a little bit vulnerable. Who knows what they are saying? Who knows what I missed here? Is there an obvious dumb shit I did in my design? Or is it good? So this is always this hesitancy to share. So it's very important that you create a safe space. And this, how does this safe space look like? It is a small group. Don't make a design critique like in this audience here. I wouldn't do a design critique with my designs here in this audience. That would be, yeah, not so smart. We have fixed members in the group. Remember, we are not creating a safe space is also important that you know your peers that are in the group. So when you know this guy is a little bit dominant, or this other colleague is a little bit shy, or he is arguing always from the tech side, or this other person has a tendency to do something else. So when you know your people, you can work with this even better. And we also do routines there and practice a lot. So setting up this safe space every week for 30 minutes is giving the environment that you can go there. No matter where you are in your design process, you can come in here. And as well, in this group, there is no hippo. So what does it mean? We discussed that a long time in our and heavily in our organization. Should there be people managers, directors in that design critique? And we opted out because of the safe space to not do that. Because even though it's our people managers, our directors are working with us, it's still the thing when they say something, there is the subconscious feeling of I have to do it like he said or she said. So we don't have people managers or directors or any of these in these design critiques. Then another tip, And that was not deliberately done. It kind of evolved over time. I got some of these rules from the book, Discussing Design. But it turned out that it's really good that you have some simple rules. Don't make it too strict and like a really stiff format. No, it's coming together, 5 people coming together and discussing a design. But we have some rules, and here are the rules. So number 1 is, this is not a design by committee event. And what I mean by that is, we are not designing in that 30 minutes. So even though we have Figma up, and everybody has a cursor, and we could move the button from left to right, or we could change the color, this is not what it's about. This is kind of a rule, don't start designing, because then you're taking off in an area like, yeah, we could improve, but we're not learning. You're not arguing why something has to change, what is the strengths, the weaknesses towards the objectives. Another one is no decision making. So even though a lot of design critiques in our groups have the setting there, we have like version A, B, and C, or 2 opposing designs, we're not making, it's not making a decision in that 30 minutes. This is not the goal, and we are really deliberate and say, we don't make a decision here. We want to discuss strengths of A versus B and vice versa. So this is all what is going on there. And third rule is, and that's the most powerful one, and our colleagues love it, is the designer decides what's happening with the feedback. So we can argue a 30-minute and ruin a design. He is totally in control, or she is totally in control. What happens with it? She can dismiss everything that was said and just move on, or take everything, or just pick 1 or 2 things to improve to the next iteration. This is a really, really powerful rule. It was not set deliberately at the beginning, but it turned out that this is changing the game in discussing design a lot in these groups. So another lesson learned when we set up design critiques is easy preparation and investment. The moment you create a format where you have to prepare 2 hours to go into the meeting to discuss your design, you're not going to do it. We opted for a preparation that should not take longer than 10 minutes. 10 minutes investment, and then you go into that critique. So let me show how that works. Some example. We have a template, and this template is addressing the 4 basic topics you need to discuss a design. It starts with the status. Is this early work, late work, mid work? What are the product objectives? And next, what is the user needs and the scenarios we are in here? And last but not least, what kind of feedback do you want to have? This is a very, very important one that you ask. I want to have feedback on the visual design, or I want to have feedback on understanding copy, or I want to have feedback on, is this addressing the objective of newly created value, or whatever your topic is, you want to have feedback that you kind of flag it out, and that's the way, that's the topic we're discussing. Ensure we add our artworks, and this stuff is then shared 1 day in advance to all the participants coming to the critique. We share that just as a link, mirror link on Slack, and everybody can go there and make yourself familiar with the artworks and the designs that will be discussed next day. And here's a little example how that might look like. Typical checkout page flow. So it's an early work maybe, and you say, I want to improve the conversion rate of the checkout. That's the business objective. The user need is, I want to check and the payment and the shipping details before I hit that critical button buy now. I want to see everything in one place. That's the need we discovered. And I want to have feedback on information architecture and wording. Not considering visual design for now because I'm in early work. This is just about structuring the page and stuff like that, and we share the artwork afterwards. Another tip, facilitation. Facilitation is for every meeting. No meeting is worse with someone taking the moderator. So every meeting improves with that, but in design critique it is, especially when you're doing it at the beginning, not very experienced, when you're starting with that format, it's very, very important. The facilitator has several roles and duties. And And we created a little facilitation guide, what to look out for. And we do this as a round robin. You saw it previously when we set up the group. Every week, somebody else in the group does the facilitation. And here are some lessons or some tips I can give you when you're looking into facilitating a design critique. One thing is, take notes openly. Sounds stupid. Normally, or what we did at the beginning is the designer made notes, what the other said. But the problem there is that he's so obsessed and so concentrating making notes that he's not participating in a conversation. So the facilitator in our kind of place does the note-taking on the Miro board or on Figma or whatever mural, whatever tool you use, or even if it's posted on the wall in the office, he writes the notes, puts it on the wall, everybody can see it, and everybody can also write a post-it note and stuff like that. And the most important duty or responsibility for the facilitator is to navigate from solution space to analyzing, to the problem analysis. Because I said this thinking mode, I see something, change, do this, is happening so fast that the moderator can here help a little bit. If a solution is set, move the button from left to right or make the color differently to quickly at least reiterate why do we have to do this? Is there a guideline, the design system says so, or whatever, and so on and so on. And sure, this is also a thing in groups that a moderator, when he has the duty to facilitate that, he's looking out a little bit for falling behinds or dominance. There are some tricks and tips you can do to do that. For example, quotas. Everybody has like 2 minutes or 3 minutes to talk, or you just write first post-its for the quiet people, the shy people, that everybody writes post-its, and then we bring that together. All right, then remote critique. It works. I mean, remote is the new normal, somebody said. I don't know. And show of hands, who does remote meetings like 100% right now? Who's on remote 100%? Just and now down when the pandemic is over, who's still 100% remote? All right, see, it's a given. I mean, many companies now have policies, even though we should not talk about policies, right? Was that this morning? That you can be on 100% remote, and yes, it works. Let me give you 2 little things when you do and start doing design critique remote. Not very surprising. One thing is facilitation is a little harder when you're remote, even though, because just the fact of jumping in between a conversation is remote trickier. There is this a little bit delay, a little bit lagging behind, or you're constantly not sure, is it still a conversation worth having, or should I facilitate now? And invest in good tools. What I can tell you, Zoom screen sharing is not enough. So the designer is firing up Zoom, and screen shares is not enough. You need something where the people who are participating can work, can look where they want to look. It's not when I, as a presenter, make the screen sharing and zoom into something, let's talk about that. That's not how it works. Normally you state your objective, and then the people look around, and they need to move around on their own. And so you need a tooling that is kind of mimicking online in the online world, the world as if you're in front of a wall or on a big table and the designs are laying there. And then you can look wherever you want, you can point your finger wherever you want. So these remote tools are very important. Okay, so last one, no, not last one, some more. Know your objectives. I said objectives, it starts with the objective, what do we try to achieve? And from there we discuss and analyze. And this is very important when you're a designer. I can tell you stories about a colleague of mine. He went into design critique and he was not sure. He just got the briefing, and then basically the 30 minutes we talked, why do we even do this? What's the point? And he's like, okay, I have some work to do with my PO. Why do I even do this? And this is then, I mean, that was also fruitful. It was improving his design to question even doing it. But this is really critical when you don't know, when you're not very sure why we even do this. It's getting either in the area of taste, I like that more, that's not helpful, or it's going into personal arguments. There's this guy from design system and he's arguing, you have to do it like this, right? But when you know your objectives, you can argue much more professional. Then there are a little tip for everybody who is presenting. This is, it says stop defending, start critiquing. This is a little, it's a little tip, a very powerful one. So when you're presenting, don't, it's like in virtual reality, going also on the other side of the table, sit next to the critiques and bash your own design. Or critique, sorry, not bashing. It's not just bashing. But that helps. It is not like you have the design and you're standing behind it and go on defense mode. No, I cannot do it like this. And stuff like that, but you're joining the critics and analyze your own design, and one thing leads to another, and help the designers and the critics to improve. Another one. This is it's not a very, it's kind of the obvious one, but this is interesting for designers who present as well as for the critics. So as a critic, when you're giving feedback, just try not to assume. Formulate it as a question, do I get it right? You have tried this already, or and stuff like that. So this is very important, because there's one thing that is sure. When you see a design the first time, you have all these thoughts, what is good, what is bad. But believe me, most of the time the designer tried a lot of stuff before. He already did it. He's just showing you where he's right now. So don't assume he has not considered anything what's going through your head. Just ask, have you tried this, or tell me how you landed here on that design, and this leads up to the analyzing work. And when you're a designer, the same thing. When somebody says something, don't assume you understand it, because that's the beginning of a misunderstanding. You can do these active listening exercises. Did I get it right? You mean this and that, and this is the context, and so on and so on. And last but not least, there is the last lesson learned, is talk about strengths. There is a story once in my design critique. A colleague of mine, he presented some work. It was mid-work, and we discussed and improved, and was a very, very good discussion. And 4 weeks later, he came with the final late work thing, and then we discussed that again. Some other topics of focus of critique. It was more than the visual design critique than the concept work. And we were discussing, last time you were here, there was something that was much better. But we didn't talk about the strength of that design, and it was kind of iterated to the worst. And that nothing sucks more that you go in a critique and you learn this design you showed last time was better. This is really not good. So talk about strength. Here it's all together on one slide for all the photo nerds here. So very important, the safe space, I said it. Remote critique works. Really don't make it a thing that only works in the office. It's very, very good. If you want one good tip, it is, as a design leader, create a safe space, and as a designer, stop defending, start critiquing. These are my best tips, either role where you are. So last but not least, for all the people who say now, yeah, we need that. Or said, maybe some design leaders here and say, yeah, I want to do that with my teams, with my peers, with my colleagues. I established a format like this in Xing for around 50 people in the whole company. We have something like 7 to 8 groups running right now. And I want to give you some tips on how to roll it out, either if you're a designer and say, okay, I want to start with my team, or if you're a design leader and say, okay, let's do something like this professionally. There's one thing that's easy for us, other than the keynote speaker this morning. There is no budget. You don't need a budget for doing design critique. I mean, maybe for the tooling, if you don't have a tooling like this, there is some money, but free tools do it as well. There's a free license of Miro available, and Mural and all the other things. Buy-in is rarely an issue. I can hardly imagine a design leader saying, I don't want you to discuss design to improve it. But as a designer, I would say when you want to start, practice with your fellow peers, your most trusted colleagues. Just 3, 4 trusted colleagues, just experiment, do it, try it out. And if you're a leader, a design leader, and you want to introduce something like that, my tip is find someone on your team who is doing it and starting experimenting. Don't dictate it, because when you dictate it, it becomes more the review format where you're making decisions other than discussing and analyzing design. So next question is, when in the design process? You maybe have something like a double diamond somewhere. It's just a representation of design process. When to do it? I can tell you from start to end you can do it. It's a continuous thing. It's not a review format you do at the end to make a decision. It is a continuous thing. And best critiques are happening in the beginning. Close to the problem, early work. There is the best design critiques happening because you can change stuff. It's still in the works. It's easy. When you're late, tomorrow we are starting coding. Hard to say, do it completely differently or seeing a big flaw in the design. This is hard. Then you might think of, for example, at Zing, we are a design organization of nearly 100 people when I count in all the leadership. You might discuss, okay, how do we set up these groups? I said 5 people in a critique session is good. If you are, our groups are 7 people because there's always someone ill or at vacation or in a workshop or whatever. So we have 7 people, and they typically are 4 to 5 people in a session. That works. But you can think of, okay, how do we put together these groups? One setup could be your cross-functional team. It's a given group of people, you know them. Just tomorrow or Friday start your first critique with these folks. You could think of in bigger organizations or in an agency where you're 5 to 10 designers. Okay, that's our 5 to 10 designers. Let's start practicing. Or in bigger organizations like ours, you could add to it more thought in terms of, okay, what other thing could we achieve even? For example, in our case, we tried, or we started with bringing together designers that typically do not work together from all over the platform, all over the company, different business units. We brought them together so they can exchange, share. So there was a second, not the primary, but a second benefit to bringing people together discussing design. So they learn about each other. You could also ask, and that's another one, structure groups of different skill sets. So junior designers, mid-level designers, senior designers, bring them together because there is a learning aspect in there. It's really, really good for skilling up junior designers, analyzing design, making good arguments towards other stakeholders. How do I argue for that version A versus the B when you have analyzed strengths and weaknesses of each other? So these are some thoughts you could put in to setting up your groups. And last but not least, that's also a good tip, is I set up all our groups to be self-organized. That means when we started each group, we had 4 to 5 weeks where I was the facilitator in that group, and we ramped up the group. But then I got out, and there is one person in this group of 7 people who is the organizer, who's doing all this Outlook thing, inviting people and stuff like that. But the group in itself is self-organized. They can choose whenever their date is. Is it Wednesday at 10 or Friday afternoon? That's up to them. And we really optimized for this group. It's a fixed group. There is no much organizing work for me to do. But some hints or some tips is give some guardrails on these things. Like I showed you, okay, it's a 30-minute discussion. With the beginning, you give some guidance. We have a facilitation guide and stuff like that. So this is good investment when you start doing it and when you scale it throughout your organization to give some guardrails there. So last but not least, there is one quote I really love, and that's from Mark Twain, is the secret of getting ahead is getting started. So my call to action to you is tomorrow, schedule your first design critique, fire up your phone maybe after the talk, before you get your next coffee, bring in your best fellow groups of people, your trusted persons, doesn't matter what discipline they have, they can be from marketing or from wherever you are. Just come together and practice, because practice is key. You have to do it. You can think hours, weeks, months, how to do it best. It will become better when you just get started next week, Monday morning. Thank you.